Remember a few weeks back, after the FBI search of Mar-a-Lago, when pundits were warning the Justice Department to be careful about investigating Donald Trump and his allies? They said it would politicize and weaponize federal law enforcement. Careful how you bring Trump down, wrote Shadi Hamid of the Brookings Institution. Even if the FBI's actions are entirely justified, I don't see any plausible scenario where an ongoing investigation of Trump decreases the existential tenor of American politics. Hamid was merely suggesting what the Wall Street Journal's Kimberly Strassel came out and said. The payback for Mar-a-Lago will be brutal. What went around Monday will come around hard for the Democrats when Republicans control the Justice Department and FBI. Yes, be careful. Imagine if Trump gets back into power. Imagine him using the Justice Department's vast powers of investigation and prosecution as weapons to retaliate against the president's perceived enemies. But you don't have to imagine. Just pull up a copy of this latest report from the New York Times, the one with the headline, "Trump pushed officials to prosecute his critics," ex-US attorney says. Shocker, right? He already did it. That ex-prosecutor is Geoffrey Berman, who from 2018 to 2020 was Trump's acting U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York. But in June 2020, after Berman began to pursue a case against Trump ally Rudy Giuliani, he was fired by Attorney General Bill Barr, who, remember, is not your friend. Then Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer said Berman's firing, quote, reeks of potential corruption of the legal process. But that was nothing compared to what Berman is saying in his new book, Holding the Line, according to the New York Times, which got an advance copy. Quote, throughout my tenure as U.S. attorney, Berman writes, Trump's Justice Department kept demanding that I use my office to aid them politically, and I kept declining, in ways just tactful enough to keep me from being fired. He continues, I walked this tightrope for 2.5 years. Eventually, the rope snapped. Berman reportedly says DOJ officials tried to have references to Trump scrubbed from charging papers from Michael D. Cohen, his former personal lawyer. He says he felt pressure to pursue Democratic former Secretary of State John Kerry, who had angered Mr. Trump by attempting to preserve the nuclear deal with Iran. And in September 2018, 2 months before the November midterms, Berman writes, a senior DOJ official called his office, cited the Southern District's recent prosecutions of 2 prominent Trump loyalists, and said the Southern District should move forward with charges against Gregory B. Craig, a powerful Democratic lawyer, and they should do so before Election Day. That official told them, quote, it's time for you guys to even things out. This confirms what we already know of President Donald Trump, that he expected the government's lawyers to be his lawyers. His people used the DOJ to go after Trump's enemies, and he used pardons to give his friends a pass. But those pardons have limits. As former Trump campaign manager and White House advisor Steve Bannon found out this week when he surrendered to New York authorities on 3 counts of money laundering and conspiracy. The charges relate to a non-profit that Bannon helped set up, then allegedly used as a piggy bank with the organization's co-founders. That so-called quote-unquote charity, We Build the Wall, took in $25 million from mostly small donors who thought they were helping to finance Trump's border wall with Mexico. What? I thought Mexico was going to pay for that. But prosecutors said the founders skimmed off at least $1 million for lavish travel, jewelry, a golf cart, and a luxury SUV. 2 of those founders pled guilty, and Bannon himself was charged and arrested by the feds in 2020, hiding out on a mega yacht off Connecticut. But he got a reprieve from those federal charges when his former boss, Donald Trump, gave him a last-minute pardon. Some might call that a gross politicization of the legal process. But no matter, because Trump's political pardon does not shield Bannon from state charges, which he says are a phony Soros conspiracy. What a summer for Steve Bannon. It started with his conviction for contempt of Congress when he refused to testify to the House January 6 committee, and now he could face years more in prison in New York. All political witch hunts, according to Bannon. And let's be honest, the law is inherently political. But as former prosecutor Geoffrey Berman's memoir suggests, it's not inherently corrupt unless it's made that way by bad faith actors like Steve Bannon, Donald J. Trump, and their eager fans. Joining me now to discuss all of this and more are Lisa Graves, who served as a Deputy Assistant Attorney General in the Clinton and Bush Justice Departments, and Ben Teitelbaum, who studies the far right and is author of the 2020 book, War for Eternity, Inside Bannon's Far-Right Circle of Global Power Brokers. Thank you both for joining me. Lisa, when you read these extracts from former U.S. Attorney Geoffrey Berman's book, you served at the top of the DOJ. Have you heard or seen anything like this before, what he's alleging?
I've never seen anything like this. Certainly, I've never seen anything reported like this since the Nixon administration. And here you have people who are described as officials, but what they really are is Donald Trump appointees, political appointees, beholden to Trump, who are pushing forward to advance his political agenda by using the law and perverting the law, perverting the course of justice, literally.
Yeah. And all this political interference, this perversion, as you put it, in his office by senior DOJ officials. Lisa, there's only a small number of people that Berman could be talking about here, right? We have Bill Barr, who tried to fire him. There's a number of people who it could have been. Not everyone can just ring the acting U.S. attorney and say, do this, do that.
That's correct. These people presumably were short-term political appointees of Trump. They were not career people, or if they were, I suppose they could have been burrowed in. But certainly we see in the excerpts that Barr was one of the people pressuring Mr. Berman along these lines. And obviously he was ultimately fired. And then you combine that with the rhetoric of these right-wingers, including the Wall Street Journal's editorial page, claiming that there'll be retribution for the legitimate and lawful pursuit of criminal charges against Trump. It's just outrageous, the hypocrisy, and also just their utter disregard for the actual course of justice.
Yes, and Bill Barr is winning a lot of plaudits from some liberals right now because he's been criticizing Trump over the Mar-a-Lago documents. It's a reminder that Bill Barr was a pretty awful authoritarian AG when he was working for Trump. Ben, even before this Berman memoir, we know what Trump did and what he tried to do in his presidential term when there were actual guardrails in place. What can he do if he gets a second chance to command the DOJ? What's he going to do with, say, an Attorney General Jeanine Pirro?
Well, it's interesting you asked that, because if we were to try and find, let's say, salvage some sense in those quotes, let's say from the Wall Street Journal you just had, at least there's some truth, I think, in the fact that retribution would be at the top of the agenda were Trump to return to office. I think the lesson learned would be not that we need to respect our democratic institutions and our justice system, but rather that you need to control it harder. I think that's the lesson that he would take away from this. So I think we would anticipate more heavy-handedness, more of what we heard in Berman's text here, just with the goal to not do it so incompetently, rather, and to make sure that those agendas are actually fulfilled.
Yeah, I've always said that incompetence was one of the last lines left between us and full-blown fascism. Lisa, one of the people urging Donald Trump to go to war with the administrative state if he comes back to office, to go to war with the deep state, is Steve Bannon. He has his own trouble this week, the Bannon indictment by the Manhattan DA. Why is this happening now? He was pardoned by Trump in January 2021. Why do you think it took Manhattan so long when the Southern District of New York had its indictment ready to go, I assume, literally years ago?
Well, there were a couple of things. One is that there was a change in the law in New York because Manafort basically asserted that there was a double jeopardy production against him being prosecuted by the state of New York for the same crimes federally. So the state of New York corrected that. But here you have a situation in which Steve Bannon poses as if he was declared innocent or found innocent when he never faced charges, because Donald Trump pardoned him literally right before inauguration. And so he was never actually, he didn't face a trial. He was charged but never convicted. And so now we have a chance to see his conviction. And I'm really looking forward to, seeing him appear in court and seeing the evidence against him. And I know there's a lot of people investigating this, like Washington Spectator and other, like the book that you just mentioned. And so, there's a lot more to learn about Steve Bannon. And I think that he's going to pay for his crimes.
Interesting. Let's see. Ben, you mentioned incompetence as one of the barriers on our road to fascism. Another might be grift. The current far right ain't that ideological. It's much more interested in money. Prosecutors say Bannon helped milk trusting right-wing donors. He milked these trusting Trump supporters for funds for the wall. That's the accusation. Then misappropriated some of the funds. I mean, is it just me, or do the biggest far-right demagogues, Ben, always have some kind of money grift going on? From Trump political fundraising, which ABC reports is under a grand jury investigation this week, to the MyPillow guy, to Alex Jones hawking supplements on InfoWars. It goes all the way down, doesn't it?
Well, it does, and it's more striking in this case. Bear in mind the type of right-wing politics that Steve Bannon has as his signature is a sort of anti-free trade in terms of putting protectionist tariffs, let's say, on our borders, or stopping immigrants, labor migration. So the idea of economic fairness, let's say, to give it a more charitable label, that's quite central to what he's been pushing. So he would lose a lot of credibility if, in fact, all of these attempts, all of these agendas that he's worked on are concealing a much more familiar right-wing agenda, which is to raise money and enrich the wealthy. So we would, yes, a credibility crisis, no doubt.
And Lisa, just on the legal front, does Bannon's New York prosecution portend anything for Trump and others in his inner circle? Trump is obviously facing a Georgia grand jury investigation of his alleged election tampering efforts there. Could what the Manhattan DA, who's been criticized for not going after Trump himself, could this action by DA Bragg, could that embolden prosecutors in other states?
I think so. I mean, here you have serious allegations. You've got two people who pleaded guilty to the crimes there at the issue of the indictment of Steve Bannon. And I think that this does signal a boldness or a willingness to pursue these charges despite the threats being made by Trump and his followers of retribution, both in a future potential administration and also through riots by his fans and followers. And so I think this is a positive step forward in the course of justice. And I hope that other jurisdictions will also move forward as quickly as possible to pursue any crimes that have been committed and to convict those involved.
And Ben, last question before we run out of time, just briefly. The far right is grappling with a lot of legal issues right now. Are we seeing the far right crack up under this legal scrutiny and attention?
It's interesting you ask that, Mehdi, because this is an informal observation on my part. But it seems to me that the Steve Bannon of the past, who might have been sloppy, might have been had some bad intentions, but you wouldn't always call him incompetent, and he was insightful. That voice has kind of exited now. I think there are fewer people paying attention to him, and the response that he gave to his newest set of legal troubles was so defensive, so over the top, saying you're going to have to kill me to stop me.
Yes.
Things like that. That it seems that confident voice is gone in some way. I wish I could be more specific with you, but I sense some sort of a deeper zeitgeist change going on here. I think that there is some fraying at the edges now in this movement that otherwise seemed impervious to trouble.